A haunting scenario from the CIA director today about the possibility that Vladimir Putin could order the use of a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine. Take a look.
Given the potential desperation of President Putin and the Russian leadership, given the setbacks that they've faced so far militarily, none of us can take lightly the threat posed by a potential resort to tactical nuclear weapons or low-yield nuclear weapons.
With me to discuss is retired two-star Major General and CNN military analyst Dana Pittard. He's also the author of Hunting the Caliphate. General, thanks so much for being with us. The CIA director also spoke of Putin's potential desperation. How likely do you think it is that Putin could order the use of a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine?
Well, good morning, Jake. I would hope it's unlikely, but we already know that Putin has been isolated. There is a sense of desperation because of the losses, the Russian forces in Ukraine. But NATO and the U.S. Must send an unequivocal message to Russia that any use of a nuclear weapon will start a nuclear war. Even the use of a, quote, tactical, unquote, nuclear weapon would be considered an act of nuclear war.
Russia's former president, Dmitry Medvedev, who's currently on Russia's Security Council, he made threats over the potential expansion of NATO. As you know, Sweden and Finland are interested and maybe on the path to joining NATO. Medvedev said today, if that happens, quote, it will no longer be possible to talk about non-nuclear status. How worried should we be? Is there a real escalation threat here?
I don't think so in that area. I think it's a lame attempt to intimidate Finland and Sweden. But just the opposite is occurring. Finland and Sweden, for the first time in 70 some odd years of neutrality, want to join NATO.
Yeah, no, not exactly a strategic brilliance by Putin if he wanted to have Ukraine to be allied with the Russians, if he wanted less of a NATO stronghold in Europe. You say that the U.S. and NATO need to take the strategic position and force Russia to react rather than the U.S. and NATO reacting to Russia. Explain what you mean by that.
Yes. In fact, the United States and NATO must take much more active measures. Again, taking the strategic initiative, make Russia react to what we do as opposed to vice versa. And there's a number of things we could be doing, whether it's declaring, along with the government of Ukraine, Western Ukraine as a humanitarian assistance zone. And that would be from east of Kyiv all the way south to Odessa. And that would be enforced on the ground by NATO troops and enforced in the air in a no-fly zone. That is one thing. Also, the U.S. and NATO could also deploy special ops advisors to assist the Ukrainians in employing many of the weapons that NATO is giving them, so they can even be better employed. Of course, when you bring special ops, they bring other enablers, whether it's intelligence, whether it's logistics, whether it's even airstrikes, which would be an escalation, but make Russia react to what we are doing. We can also push nations that are currently under Russia's thumb, whether it's Kazakhstan in the east, Tajikistan, Georgia, even Belarus, to rebel against Russian rule. Again, that will bring dilemmas for Putin and Russia. Their forces are dwindling, and they're trying to bring forces from other areas, so there's weakness in other areas.
Well, to play devil's advocate, I obviously don't have a position one way or the other, but to play devil's advocate, what you're proposing in terms of the humanitarian corridors in the western part of Ukraine or special operators advising and assisting would almost certainly lead to a U.S. service member being wounded or killed by Russian troops. I mean, if history is any guide, and then all of a sudden what President Biden has said he doesn't want, World War III.
Again, I'm not sure that would cause World War III, but what it would reinforce something President Biden has said. is that it is a battle between democracy, freedom-loving nations, and autocracy. And right now, what we're doing is helpful to Ukraine, but is that enough? What we want to see, ideally, is for Ukraine to win and Russia to go back into Russia and honor the borders of a sovereign, free nation of Ukraine.
General Dana Pittard, thank you so much for your thoughts this evening. It's always good to have you on. Coming up, train lines are lifeline.